The forest was alive with morning light. Sunbeams slipped through tall conifers and shone upon ferns that swayed in the wind. The air was heavy with the scent of wet soil and fresh leaves. Somewhere a distant roar echoed, and then faded like thunder moving away. To most creatures of the valley the sound was a warning, but to Micropachycephalosaurus it was simply part of life. He was too small to challenge such giants, so he learned to exist in the quiet spaces that others ignored. He was no taller than a rabbit. His legs were thin but strong, built for running over roots and stones. His eyes were sharp and watchful, always scanning for danger. On his head rested a small dome of bone, smooth and round like a polished stone. To him it was simply part of his body, but one day it would be his shield and his tool. He moved carefully among the ferns, searching for tender shoots. Each bite was quick and light. He did not linger in one place for long. Danger could come from anywhere. A shadow in the sky might mean a winged hunter. A shifting branch might hide a predator waiting to strike. Every sound mattered. Every movement demanded his full attention. Yet there was wonder too. Birds with long tails darted through the trees, singing strange calls. Insects buzzed in the air, glowing when the sun caught their wings. Small lizards skittered between rocks. The forest was a kingdom of endless motion, and Micropachycephalosaurus was part of it, though he held no crown. Near a fallen log he paused and lifted his head. The bark was covered in moss and tiny mushrooms. He scraped gently with his beak, pulling loose bits to taste. The flavor was sharp but filling. He chirped softly, a sound that carried only a short distance. It was his way of speaking to the forest, and perhaps to himself. The ground trembled slightly under his feet. He froze. Far away, heavy steps shook the soil. A herd of hadrosaurs moved through the valley, their bodies so large that even the earth seemed to bow under them. Micropachycephalosaurus did not wait to see them. He slipped beneath the log and crouched in silence. His heart beat fast but steady. He had learned from the beginning that stillness could be as important as speed. Minutes passed before the rumble faded. He stepped out once more into the open. The air was still thick with the scent of crushed plants left behind by the herd. He sniffed the wind and then lowered his head to feed again. Life for him was simple, but never easy. Each day was a trial. Each step a balance between hunger and survival. He was small in a world of monsters, yet his spirit was sharp as the beak he used to nibble leaves. The forest might belong to the giants, but even here the tiny dome head found his place. The sun rose higher over the valley, and light poured into the forest like golden fire. Trees stretched above like towers, their branches swaying with a slow breath of wind. The air rang with distant calls, deep and heavy. For Micropachycephalosaurus, it was a reminder that he lived among giants. He darted through a patch of low ferns, his small body almost hidden by the leaves. His beak snapped gently at tender stems while his eyes remained sharp and alert. Every sound mattered in a world where danger and wonder lived side by side. He was not the only creature feeding in the morning light. From the shadows, a herd of hadrosaurs appeared. Their long snouts swung as they tore at branches. Their feet crushed the earth with every step. The ground shook and leaves fell from the trees as their massive bodies moved together. To Micropachycephalosaurus, they were living mountains. He watched in silence, not with fear, but with deep caution. He knew they were not hunters, yet one careless step could end him. Beyond the hadrosaurs, he caught sight of even greater shapes. Ceratopsians with long horns and frilled neck shields grazed near the edge of the clearing. Their horns shone in the sunlight like sharpened spears. They moved slow and steady, their tails sweeping behind them like heavy ropes. Micropachycephalosaurus stayed hidden. He had learned that where there were horns and beaks, there were also predators waiting for a chance to strike. The forest floor told many stories. Giant footprints filled with water marked where sauropods had passed days before. Their size was beyond his understanding. He only knew that the ground bent under their weight and that trees fell when they fed. For one so small, it was like living in the shadow of moving cliffs. He slipped into a hollow between roots and watched as the giants fed. His tiny dome head tilted with curiosity. Though he was fragile, he did not feel useless. The giants could not reach the soft plants that grew in narrow spaces. They did not notice the insects that he chased or the mushrooms that grew in hidden logs. In these small places, Micropachycephalosaurus found his share of life. The forest itself seemed alive beyond the animals. Vines wrapped around tree trunks. Ferns spread wide carpets across the floor. The air was damp and smelled of moss and sweet fruit. Birds with teeth flitted through the canopy chasing insects. Small mammals rustled in the undergrowth. It was a place where countless lives wove together, each creature playing its part. Yet always danger was near. Micropachycephalosaurus froze as a shadow stretched across the ground. A trudon moved quietly among the ferns, its eyes glowing in the dim light. The hunter sniffed the air, then turned its head toward the herd. Micropachycephalosaurus pressed himself against the roots, heart pounding. He knew this forest belonged not only to the giants, but also to those who hunted the weak. The forest was quiet in the heat of midday. Cicadas sang from the trees, and the air shimmered above the ferns. Micropachycephalosaurus moved carefully through the undergrowth, his body close to the ground. He had learned that silence could mean safety, but it could also mean that something dangerous was near. He paused to nibble a cluster of tender shoots near a fallen branch. The taste was fresh and sweet, but his eyes never rested for long. He lifted his head, often tilting it side to side. His dome caught the sun like a polished stone. The world around him felt too still. Then he saw it. A pair of golden eyes glimmered in the shadows. Long claws shifted against the soil. The creature was slender, but deadly. A trudon hunter. Its long snout opened slightly to reveal sharp teeth. It was not as large as the giants of the valley, but it was clever and fast. For Micropachycephalosaurus, this was the most dangerous kind of enemy. The trudon stepped forward with slow, careful movements. Its tail swayed for balance, its body lowered in a silent stalk. Micropachycephalosaurus froze against the branch. His heart raced, but his legs trembled with energy ready to burst. The hunter crept closer. A twig snapped under its claw. That sound was enough. Micropachycephalosaurus shot forward like a dart. His small legs carried him over roots and under low plants. Leaves whipped against his sides as he sprinted. The trudon gave chase, hissing sharply as it lunged after him. The forest became a blur of motion. Every leap was a choice. A wrong step would mean teeth and claws. Micropachycephalosaurus dived into a patch of thick ferns. The trudon slashed through the fronds with its claws. He zigzagged through the green maze, his body almost vanishing within the plants. He reached a cluster of rocks and squeezed between them. The gap was narrow, barely wide enough for his small body. The trudon snapped at the opening but could not fit. Its teeth clashed against stone. Frustration flashed in its eyes as it clawed at the rocks. Micropachycephalosaurus crouched deep in the crevice. His breathing came fast but steady. He waited, listening as the predator circled. The trudon hissed again, then moved away. Its footsteps faded into the forest until only the cicadas sang once more. For a long time, he remained hidden. His instincts told him not to rush. At last, he crept from the rocks and scanned the trees. Nothing moved. The danger had passed. Though he was small, he had survived. Not by strength, not by teeth, but by speed and the gift of fitting where others could not. This was his way. In a world filled with hunters, he was the hidden runner, the tiny dome head who lived where giants could not follow. The forest thinned as Micropachycephalosaurus followed the sound of water. The air grew heavy and damp. Trees leaned close to one another as if whispering. Beyond the last wall of ferns lay the wide body of a river. Its surface gleamed silver beneath the sun, yet its depths were dark and silent. He approached carefully. The river offered both danger and life. Plants near the bank grew lush and green. Insects hovered above the water like drifting sparks. Small fish darted beneath the surface, flashing in quick bursts of light. It was tempting to draw closer, yet instinct held him back. The mud near the edge bore deep grooves where larger creatures had come to drink. Hadrosaurs had left broad prints. Ceratopsians had stamped down the soil with their heavy weight. Mixed among them were clawed tracks. Something had hunted here. Micropachycephalosaurus lowered his head and sniffed. The smell of musk and rot clung to the riverbank. He crouched beneath a fallen branch and waited. The sound of the current was steady, but now and then the water rippled without wind. Eyes rose from the surface dark and patient. A reptile far older than any dinosaur floated half-hidden. Its snout broke the waterline, its gaze cold and fixed. It slid forward, then sank again, leaving only circles that spread across the current. Micropachycephalosaurus stepped back into the shadows. He knew that to drink too close would mean jaws snapping shut. He searched for another path. Upstream, a fallen tree stretched across the water. Its trunk was thick, covered with moss and mushrooms. It might serve as a bridge. He crept toward it, moving low through the reeds. Every rustle made him pause. Once he froze as a heron-like bird spread its wings and lifted into the sky. Its cry echoed and then faded into silence. He waited before continuing. At last he reached the log. The water beneath rushed fast and dark. He placed one foot upon the wood. It wobbled slightly, but held. Slowly, he crossed his body, pressed low, his tail stretched for balance. Halfway across he stopped. Beneath him something massive shifted. A long shape glided just below the surface. The crocodilian predator followed the shadow of the log, its eyes glimmering from the depths. Micropachycephalosaurus quickened his steps. The log rolled under his weight, but he dashed forward, claws scraping the bark. A splash erupted as the predator lunged upward, but its jaws closed upon empty air. By the time the water stilled, he had reached the far bank. Breathing fast, he darted into the ferns and hid among the roots of a tree. The river roared behind him. His dome head lifted as he listened. The danger remained, but it was behind him now. He had crossed the river of shadows. For one so small, every crossing was a battle, yet once again, he had lived. The far side of the river was wilder than the land he had left. Ferns grew in thick walls taller than his head. Their stalks brushed against one another with a soft hiss as the wind passed. The ground was damp and soft beneath his feet. Micropachycephalosaurus moved carefully, sniffing at roots and pulling tender shoots from the soil. Here food was plenty, yet danger never rested. He stepped into a clearing where shafts of sunlight poured through the canopy. The air was heavy with the buzzing of insects. He chirped softly and lowered his head to feed. Then the light dimmed. A shadow swept across the clearing. It stretched wide and silent. Micropachycephalosaurus froze, his dome lifted toward the sky. Above him, wings beat slow and steady. A pterosaur circled, its wings vast like stretched sails. Its beak glinted in the sun, long and sharp. The hunter tilted downward, eyes fixed upon the ground. Micropachycephalosaurus darted into the ferns. The air rushed as the pterosaur dove. Its beak pierced the soil where he had stood a breath earlier. Leaves burst upward as it pulled away, screeching in frustration. He ran, his legs pounding the damp ground. The ferns bent and snapped as he tore through them. Above the canopy, the pterosaur followed his movement by shadow. It dived again, crashing into the plants, sending stalks flying. Its jaws snapped shut with a crack that echoed across the clearing. Micropachycephalosaurus swerved sharply into denser growth. His small body slipped through gaps too narrow for the hunter's wings. The pterosaur screeched and flapped, rising once more into the sky. Yet it did not give up. It circled again, searching for a gap to strike. He darted left, then right, weaving through the green maze. His tail flicked for balance as he leapt over roots. He could hear the wings overhead, feel the rush of wind as they passed close. The ground shook each time the predator slammed down in a failed strike. Ahead he spotted safety. A thicket of thorny shrubs grew against a slope, their branches tangled like a wall. Without hesitation, he sprinted toward them. The pterosaur saw the move and folded its wings, diving one last time. Micropachycephalosaurus hurled himself into the shrubs. Thorns scraped his sides as he vanished into the tangle. Behind him, the pterosaur slammed against the barrier, its beak snapping at empty air. Frustrated, it beat its wings and rose into the sky, circling once before drifting away. Inside the thicket, Micropachycephalosaurus crouched among roots, his breath fast and sharp. The sunlight flickered through gaps above him. Slowly his heart calmed. He was scratched but alive. Once again, speed had carried him where size and strength could not. The forest grew still again. He edged out from the thorns and looked to the sky. The hunter was gone. The ferns swayed gently in the breeze as though nothing had happened. Yet for him the memory of wings and shadow would linger. In this world, survival was a race without end. The day grew heavy with heat. Clouds gathered high above the forest, yet no rain fell. The air was still and thick, as if the land itself was holding its breath. Micropachycephalosaurus moved restlessly through the ferns. His senses were sharp, but something felt different. The forest was too quiet. He reached a rise where the trees opened to a view of the valley. Normally the calls of hadrosaurs and the rumble of distant herds filled the air. Now there was silence. Even the insects had stilled. He tilted his head and tapped the ground with his claw. A faint tremor answered. At first it was only a soft vibration, like the purring of some vast, unseen beast. Then the soil shifted again, stronger this time. Pebbles rolled down the slope. Birds erupted from the trees, their cries sharp with alarm. Micropachycephalosaurus froze, his body stiff and low. The ground gave another shudder. Trees swayed as though struck by invisible hands. A deep sound rose from beneath the earth, a groan that seemed endless. The quake had begun. He darted down the slope, weaving between roots as the forest trembled. A crack split the ground near his feet, and he leapt across. Branches snapped above him. A tall tree toppled with a crash, blocking the path behind. Dust filled the air, choking and thick. Through the haze, larger dinosaurs began to panic. A herd of hadrosaurs stormed through the valley, their calls frantic. Their massive bodies crushed plants and tore branches as they fled. Micropachycephalosaurus pressed himself against a fallen trunk as the herd thundered past. The earth shook not only from the quake, but from the stampede. A boulder rolled from the hillside, slamming into the river below. Water surged upward in a white spray. The riverbanks collapsed in places, sending mud sliding into the current. Micropachycephalosaurus sprinted to higher ground, his dome, head low, his legs moving as fast as they could carry him. The quake grew stronger. The ground heaved like a living thing. Cracks spread across the forest floor, splitting logs and roots. He leapt across a widening gap just as the soil behind him crumbled into a pit. His heart pounded, but he did not slow. At last the shaking began to fade. Trees still groaned and rocks still slid, but the worst had passed. Micropachycephalosaurus crouched beneath a thick root, his body trembling with exhaustion. Dust hung in the air, dimming the light of the sun. The forest looked broken. Yet he was alive. He lifted his head and listened. Somewhere in the distance a predator called, but its voice sounded weak compared to the roar of the earth. For the first time, Micropachycephalosaurus realized that even the greatest hunters were nothing when the ground itself turned against them. The quake had ended, but its mark would remain. The forest was changed. Paths were blocked. Water flowed in new places. The world was different, and survival would be harder than before. The quake had ended, but the forest still groaned like a wounded beast. Trees leaned at odd angles, roots torn from the soil. Stones slid down the slopes, sending echoes through the valley. Micropachycephalosaurus crept forward carefully, his dome low, his legs steady. He could feel the earth still shifting beneath him, as though it had not fully calmed. He followed a path between broken logs and fallen branches. The air was thick with dust that stung his eyes and nose. Each step carried risk. Holes had opened in the ground where roots once grew. Water seeped into cracks, forming sudden streams that cut across the soil. Ahead, the land dropped into a ravine that had not been there before. The quake had torn the valley apart, leaving a deep split where once there had been forest floor. Micropachycephalosaurus edged closer and peered down. Rocks crumbled into the darkness below. At the far side, the land continued unbroken, yet the gap between was wide. He tested the ground, but it shook again under his weight. He stepped back with a quick chirp of alarm. Behind him came another sound. Branches snapped. The heavy thud of steps followed. Something larger was moving through the wreckage. A Trudon appeared from the dust, its eyes glowing faint. It looked leaner than before, its scales streaked with mud and scratches. The hunter had survived the quake too. Now its gaze locked onto the small dome-headed dinosaur at the edge of the ravine. Micropachycephalosaurus bolted. He sprinted along the edge, his claws digging into the soil for grip. The Troodon followed, swift and silent, its long legs eating the ground. The chase drove them toward a narrow fallen log that bridged the ravine. The log was cracked, its bark stripped during the quake. It swayed in the wind, but it was the only path. Without pause, Micropachycephalosaurus leapt onto it. The wood shook under his weight. He raced across, his tail stiff for balance. The Troodon followed, teeth flashing as it lunged forward. Halfway across, the log shifted with a groan. Splinters snapped. Micropachycephalosaurus pushed harder. He reached the far side and hurled himself onto solid ground. Behind him, the log split in two. The Troodon clung for a heartbeat, then the wood gave way. With a screech, the predator plunged into the ravine below. Stones and dust rained after it until silence swallowed the gap. Micropachycephalosaurus crouched, his sides heaving. He had escaped, but only just. His dome glistened with sweat, and his body shook from the run. He looked once more across the broken ravine. The predator was gone. The forest had chosen its path. He turned away and slipped into the cover of ferns. The quake had carved new dangers into the land, but also had freed him from the hunter's pursuit. His size, his speed, and his will had carried him once more through death's grasp. The tiny dome head had survived the narrow escape.